Welcome to Martial Secrets, where we seek out the most interesting and skilled martial artists to share their insights and years of training with you, the listener. I'm your host, Kris Wilder, and on this broadcast, John Roseberry. A boxer, karateka, judoka, John Roseberry has trained in the martial arts for some 50 years. A 7-time All-United States Marine Corps judo champion, he's also been the All-Service champion 3 times and an alternate to the U.S. Olympic judo team. A direct student of Sekichi Taguchi and Goju Karate and former Marine Corps drill instructor, Roseberry has built an international martial arts organization, including his 7,000-foot square home dojo in Lincoln, Nebraska. John Roseberry, welcome to Martial Secrets.
Well, how are you doing?
Yeah, if I were doing any better, I'd have to be twins.
Well, there you go.
Hey, let's take a quick rundown of your experience. You did some boxing to begin with. You moved into judo. You gravitated to karate. Where did you train? Let's start from the beginning with that.
Well, kind of started on the streets, actually, in Kansas City, where I grew up, doing the Golden Glove or the Silver Glove certification, you want to call it, And then from there, had a little problem, joined the military, hung out in the military, first 4 years Air Force. Found myself in England, representing the All Air Force boxing team. I was on there. And then the martial arts part of that was when we were finished training, actually in boxing, these judo guys would start showing up, So I used to hang around and watch those guys a little bit. And, of course, my attitude was pretty cocky at that time that, hey, that's some good shit, I mean, I hit somebody in the head and throw them down and stomp them, So that was kind of my initial thing in the judo thing. So I found myself watching a little bit, and then I tried it, then I'd quit, and I'd try it again and quit, and then somewhere along the line there, I just started hanging out with the judo, and so did that for a while, and then come back to this country, got out of the Air Force, got in a little trouble, was forced to go back into the military, so I joined the Marine Corps, and so that's where it goes from there, and then, of course, I found myself actually in Okinawa and training over there, and just kind of lost all the hostility, lost the interest in boxing and the whole works, and so just pursued the martial arts since that time.
As a young man in England, you began your training in judo, as you said, but you talk about quitting judo every practice. Explain what you mean when you say
Well,
you
see, I
quit.
didn't want to work. You see, I looked at it as too much work. I'm not going to do that, That was my attitude. And then I'd go and I'd learn a throw, for an example, right? I said, well, that was pretty good, so I could use that, and then I'd go back and I'd learn something else, and I'd stop. So this happened 3 or 4 different times, and then finally I just stayed with it,
It was too much work, you were saying, to begin with.
Well, at the beginning, yeah, that's not cool, man, getting thrown down, and when you don't want nobody to touch you, something like that, then all the ones here, somebody's throwing you down. So, no, that's not good, because I just want to wrap somebody,
Well, do you see that attitude in particularly young men coming into your karate judo school, your dojo these days?
You do see some, but it's very little. I managed a swimming pool for 17 years, and here's where I did see a lot of attitude. I see myself in a lot of these kids, and just recently I ran into a kid. I said, hey, Mr. Roseberry, says, you don't remember me? I said, I do remember, and I did remember the kid, He said, you kept me out of jail. You got me straight, So you hear some stories like that. But, yes, you do run into some attitudes, but then if they come to the dojo, you kind of see that attitude dissipate, kind of go away, and then you're still good martial artist,
You talk often about a great lesson that came from your judo instructor, Mr. Matsumoto. And the story goes on about a rough and tumble black belt and you being a brown belt. Would you share that story with our listeners?
Well, what happened, I was training in Okinawa, and we had this big tournament, and so anyway, it come down to the 2 of us, There was a black belt, I think was out of Kinuyuki, not Kinuyuki, but Tamaki Sensei's dojo, and then, of course, my coming from Mr. Matsumoto, so it come down to the 2 of us for the championship. And I lost that tournament, and so my teacher,
you were a brown belt.
I was
correct?
a brown belt, yeah. So my teacher come over and said, all right, Roseberry, you give me your belt. And so he took my belt and he folded it up, man. He just hit me right upside my head, and he just chewed my butt out. But I didn't understand I didn't understand one word that he was saying because it was Japanese, but then on the other hand, I knew exactly what he was saying, that I wasn't fighting the guy, I was fighting that belt, you know. And so from that, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, too, because after that, you know, I didn't care if I was fighting a white belt, green belt, whatever the case might be, you know. I was going to go right after that person, you know. So that was a good lesson learned, you know. But I can still see that happening just as plain as I'm talking to you, you know. Yeah.
What was Mr. Matsumoto like as a judo instructor? What was his dojo like?
Well, you know, if you didn't know he was a judo player, man, you'd think, well, man, he could never do nothing, you know. Just a very gentle person. But then when he gets on the mat, it's just kind of like hide and Jekyll, you know. That it's just a flip flop. Man, this guy's a maniac, you know. And to share a story with that they have the years ago they would have like up in Japan they would have like A, B, C, D, and E teams up there, and so like for an example, the team that went up there, 9 of those players come out of my teacher's dojo, and I was actually the only American on that team to make that. So that was kind of an honor to do that, and then it was also an honor just to be a part of that team, but then to see 9 people out of your club representing the whole island of Okinawa, you know. So that was kind of neat to see that. So
you wound up in, talking about Okinawa, you wound up in Mr. Taguchi's karate dojo. How did you wind up on his floor? You share with us your first impressions of Mr. Taguchi and the dojo in Nakanomachi.
Well, what happened is I was heading back to Okinawa. I was on a ship, and there was a fellow by the name of Joe White, which was actually the very first American actually in Mr. Taguchi's dojo, and he's also the very first American to make black belt out of Mr. Taguchi. I met him, and so we just kind of fellowshipped, and it just kind of worked out to where he was stationed directly across the street from where I was stationed, actually on Okinawa. And so we were down in the village one day and ran into him, after we got over there and stuff, and he said, well, I'm going to go train, you know. So I followed him right on up to the dojo, you know, and I met Mr. Taguchi and just like that. And then I just kind of shared, Joe had mentioned my judo and stuff like that. And at that time I was training under Mr. Matsumoto, you know, which was probably about not even a mile from the dojo. The two dojos probably not even a mile apart, you know.
Is anything in Okinawa a mile apart?
Well, yeah, in some places. But anyway, Joe White was an introduction there, and so I started my training under Mr. Taguchi, and I can recall my first 3 classes, I didn't throw not one punch. I did come in, we did bow in with the whole class, and then he says, Roseberry, you go over there and sit down, you know, which I did. And it was kind of a test, you know, to see was I going to waste your time. So this happened 3 different occasions. And the 4th time I went back there, he said, he let me start doing exercises and stuff like that. But at the end of those classes, I was given a rag along with some other Okinawans, and I had to mop the floor down on your hands and knees and your damp rag and stuff like that. And so that happened 3 different times. And so finally, I was the only one, you know. I didn't see many Americans actually in a dojo, but then as somebody Okinawa becoming trained, he would do the same thing with them also. So I just looked at that as a test and to say, if you're going to waste my time or are you really here to train, you know. And so I continued on, you know, and so here I am.
What was once you got out of that initial kind of introduction, what was his class like? Now, he clearly took a different tangent than what might have been considered, well, at least it appears that he took a different tangent than what might be considered at the time the old way of teaching. He structured things, had a pretty significant order to how he did things. At least it appears to be. Is that what happened?
Well, you know, he kind of, after Miyagi died, you know, there was kind of an organization set up, you know, which Mr. Taguchi was the secretary of that organization. And then a couple of years later, you know, there were some problems with their organization, so it dissipated, broke up. And so Mr. Taguchi kind of just started his own thing, you know, and so a lot of people don't realize that Mr. Taguchi's father and Miyagi's were very close friends, you know, and so as Mr. Taguchi would say, there was numerous of evenings he would actually have to take Miyagi home because his father would sit and drink, and then, of course, I just heard